my English teacher friends. Kristian Kuhn coming at you again, affectionately known as the Bob Ross of composition. And I'm churning out some new material for my AP Lang students and my on-level juniors, in particular synthesis essay writing workshop centering around some good, contestable, juicy, essential questions. And I got a good one today. College is a scam, ... or is it? So this is something I know my students banter, around about quite a bit, and it's really become prominent since COVID. In my district, I'm seeing, a big number of students opting not to go to college, and that's something that is relatively new and really unique about the current generation. So what I'll do in this is my typical, bit. I'll model how to do introductory paragraphs, manipulating my inverted and declarative thesis heuristic. And then we'll tackle a couple of body paragraphs using the syllogistic method heuristic. And for good measure, I'll tag a conclusion on there and show you my conclusion stems. So before we jump in, please subscribe to the channel. It's called Kristian Kuhn, the Bob Ross of composition. Spread the word far and wide. Tell your friends, your colleagues, your students, and let's watch this grow. So let's talk about this. Source material. So in order for me to Bob Ross my instruction and model this for my students, I had to get sources specific to the theses that I was modeling. So that source pack is down below in the description, but here's the caveat. Your students probably are pretty wedded to their particular slants and bents on this. So I opened up the, Pandora's box and said, go get your own sources, right? If you need to do a little bit of research, by all means do it. So that's what a lot of my students did, and I was cool with that. And I just set the parameter that, 6 sources is what you need, because the directions that I'll show you in a second are going to stipulate that you need to use 3. And then further, all of my exemplars and models on the slides that you're going to see forthcoming here are also down below, and you can download them. Just look in the description. So I did draw up a prompt, and it looks like this. College degrees have been considered a ticket to financial success for a long time, but faith in the return on investment of higher education appears to be waning. Enrollment at some institutions is in decline, and some analysts are pushing back against the narrative that college is necessary. While this isn't a new debate, changes in employer expectations and generational differences are shaping the way we discuss the value of a college education. So let's move on here. Here's the rest of it. Carefully read the following 6 sources, including the introductory information for each source. Write an essay that synthesizes material from at least 3 of the sources and develops, and here's the kicker, your position on the value, if any, of earning a college degree. So right in the vein of the College Board, right, very similar to the language they use for FRQ1. So what I'm going to do for this, and I've already alluded to this, is I'm going to Bob Ross my instruction. And this is a practice that I teach at the National Writing Project, or when I train teachers. There's a seismic difference between the assigning of writing and the explicit direct teaching of it. So what you're going to see is me get to the proverbial easel and canvas, and I'm going to paint with and for my students, your students, you. I'm going to show you explicitly how to wield the pen on paper to get these thoughts cogently down on paper. So without further ado, let's start with that introductory paragraph and talk about one of the heuristics that I use. It's called the declarative thesis. So students can drop the thesis in the first line, and hence that's why it's called declarative. And then one of the things I like for them to do, because this is just going to be a 4-paragraph essay for on the AP language exam, my students for all FRQs, they only write 4 paragraphs, intro, 2 bodies, conclusion. By context and background, I also refer to it as the seeds of the line of reasoning. So kind of like drop the GPS and hint, imply where you're going to go in each body paragraph, sort of like set the direction. And then the other thing too that I like to see in this is tier 2 level vocabulary. It is an academic paper. You do have an academic audience. So just your average run-of-the-mill SAT level caliber words is nice to see. And then in terms of cultivating nice rhythm voice flow, I want students to focus on varying their sentence constructs and their sentence patterns. And I have a slew of essays for my Word Study Academy to help kids augment their vocab, but also on learning the 12 sentence types and the 20 sentence patterns in my YouTube channel. So teachers, students that are watching this, if you want to, freshen up on any of that stuff, just go back and have at it. And then just like the essay is 4 paragraphs, the intro is 4 sentences. We can flip that heuristic up on top of its head and invert the thesis. And in this case, you just end with the thesis. Same old stuff. You're going to drop the seeds for the line of reasoning, sprinkle in some tier 2, cook up them sentence constructs, 4 sentences. So enough of me talking into the ether. Let's unpack this and take a look at 4 exemplars. So I got what I like to do is present both sides of the argument and kind of represent both factions, just so that I'm fair and balanced and give kids, a chance to see their thesis in action. So I'll read this whole thing and then I'll unpack it for you. For generations, school-age children have been fed the false narrative that in order to achieve success in life, one must obtain a college education. Within the context of our present-day economical quagmire, this notion could not be further from the truth. Not only do the vast majority of college graduates find themselves underemployed or unemployed upon finishing their degree, but the piece of paper they earn, that diploma, does not benefit them fiscally over the long haul. Clearly, not only is college a scam, but it is a wholly unnecessary rite of passage. So let's spy with our little eyes the thesis statement. Clearly, it's in the last sentence, so this is inverted. Let's talk about the lines of reasoning. Like, where are we going? How did this exemplar set up the GPS? Well, first, the economy that these kids are saddled with doesn't favor a college education. At least that's what I'm espousing in this. And I know some of my students will go that route. So that's the first body paragraph. Second body paragraph is that it's a false argument to say that college, folks that earn college degrees earn substantially more than those that do not. And I have a ton of research that I can use in my body paragraphs to show that, folks that go into the trades or the military actually earn more than most majors. So I would do that direction in my second body paragraph. Look at the sentence constructs real quick. One of the things that I tell my students is this: try to avoid paralleling your syntax. And here's the reason why. Struggling and emerging writers tend to over rely on independent clauses and short, simple declarative sentences. So it yields that chop, 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 chop tone, that monotony. And I tell my kids, look at the sentence you just dropped and don't parallel it. Like, use a different sentence construct after that. That tends to create a nice rhythm and a nice flow. And I got that going on in all 4 sentences here. Another thing too, at this stage of the game, like early in the year, I run my Nuance Academy. My kids become syntactical ninjas. They know how to wield their colons and their semicolons and their dashes and their ellipses and their parentheticals. But I also explicitly teach the 12 sentence types and the 20 sentence patterns. So at sentence level, they can do some trigger-rated things, again, to get the voice rhythm flow. And at the AP level, that bodes well if they want to, be in contention for the sophistication point. All right, let's paint another one, and I'm going to flip the perspective, but use the same heuristic. If one is concerned about their economic foothold in life, as well as their ability to have financial freedom, then earning a college degree is definitely something of benefit. Statistically, it is quite clear that stopping one's educational pursuits at the high school level is a detriment on so many levels. But in saying this, one must also concede that not all academic majors produce financial benefits that justify the expense of that particular degree. While most college degrees come with a hefty price tag, it nonetheless boils down to the following adage: what one puts in, they get back 100-fold. So this is a little different. The thesis comes up on top, so it's declarative. You can see same old stuff going on at sentence level in terms of the variation with the constructs and the patterns. Tier 2 vocabulary is present. And then in terms of the lines of reasoning, right, one of the things that I noticed in the Facebook groups, lots of folks are talking about is where do you offer the concession? And I'm of the persuasion where it really doesn't matter. And I've already alluded to a concession in here. One of the body paragraphs in which I go is going to take a look at how some academic majors really, students don't financially benefit. And I can speak of that. Like, I got a theology and a philosophy degree. I don't think I ever made a bloody red cent off of those degrees, but I have them, and I enjoyed myself doing, studying that sort of stuff. And then, right, the other body paragraph is going to argue the opposite of what the first exemplar did and prove that these degrees actually do financially benefit the learner. So again, 4 sentences, sentence constructs. Tier 2, drop the seeds of the line of reasoning. Students, teachers, yes, you can. It's pretty easy. Don't give up, right? It's very, very easy. Here's another one. The hallowed halls of higher education serve but one purpose: to indoctrinate the collective citizenry into becoming woke liberals. Of little surprise, the vast majority of college professors self-identify as liberals, and unfortunately, they use their platforms to brainwash their students into accepting their belief systems blindly. Further, given that the government funds these institutions, all one really needs to do is follow the money trail to see what is really going on behind the scenes. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, pursuing a college degree is the biggest scam in the world. So this one's just like the first one. It inverts. Thesis comes last. In terms of the lines of reasoning and the GPS, all right, we got to prove in the body paragraphs that most professors are liberals and they bandstand their political beliefs and, try to have their kids espouse or like spew back those beliefs. And then also we got to take a look at the funding that the government provides for these schools and how much that drives instruction. Same old thing with the sentence constructs. I got a little fancier in this one, used a colon, I got a dash in there. As well. So I just want to show my students how to do that kind of syntactical stuff at sentence level. And out of the gate, I've done what I need to do. I got a thesis, it's articulate, it's flowing well. So let's do one more just to really shore it up. Here it is. Every bank account has a critical threshold before the coffers run dry, and such is the case of our country's treasury. The question is not whether or not college is a scam, but who should be covering the bill. Given that the average citizen works an average of 4 decades of their life, a significant amount of time that profits the government, it stands to reason that college should be paid for by the parties who benefit most from the earning of that particular degree. Instead of funding frivolous wars and squandering taxpayer dollars on trifling matters, the government should incentivize citizens earning higher degrees of education by providing free tuition. So you can see here, students can go in a wide variety of directions, and this is all stuff that we got to the heart of the matter of during our Harkness discussion. And kids grappled and tussled with these particular theses, and then accordingly they went and got their source material for it. Same old stuff here. You can clearly manifestly see the lines of reasoning, the GPS, the placement of the thesis, sentence constructs, tier 2. And that's all you do for the declarative and inverted thesis heuristic. So students, give it a whirl. Teachers, give it a whirl and try your hand at it. So we got the introductory paragraph done. Next question becomes, so how do I write the body paragraphs? And for those that are familiar with my work, you know that I fully embrace with my arms the syllogistic method. And this is rooted in the Aristotelian tradition, comes from Aristotle. He ran a school called the Lyceum, and the townsboys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, wordsmithing, word wrangling. And you see this at play in some of the seminal texts of that era. And one in particular is Plato's Republic. And their essential question is, what is justice? And all these philosophical scholars would step to the proverbial mic and drop their definition. And Aristotle noted, some of the kids are exceptional at this. And we say the same of our students with regards to their composition. So he studied the inner machinations of those exceptional students in terms of like their brain patterns, their sequencing patterns, and said, aha, eureka, I got it, light bulb illuminated. They are thinking syllogistically. And basically, when students argue, good thinking is good writing. What we're trying to do is teach our kids how to think on paper. So it's got to be kind of mathematical, computative, like sequential, very logically organized. To use Aristotle's word cogent, we call it line of reasoning. So what I'm going to do is take this syllogistic method where you go premise 1, premise 2, conclusion, and swing it over into a heuristic that looks like this. So the first premise in synthesis and argument, you have to articulate a why reason. So up top in the introductory paragraph, we don't get into the minutia of why we're espousing that particular thesis. We save that, we reserve it for the body paragraphs. So there's some math to this, so you might want to take a couple of notes here. The first premise is 3 sentences long, and it's kind of a safeguard mechanism that I like to put in place, because I find if students begin to get into the source material in the first sentence, the second sentence, the third sentence, they're not meeting the demands of the assignment. They're basically regurgitating or plot summarizing the sources. So the argument needs to stay central. So I find when students take 3 sentences to encapsulate that argument, they tend to be good in the hood and, stay focused and argue and synthesize the sources while keeping the argument central. So the second premise begins at the 4th sentence. And this is where I want students to introduce their textual support in a teeter-totter balance of quoting and paraphrasing. And then we have to be mindful of this. Syllogisms need to be concluded, and this is where you just link echo back to the thesis and the prompt. One last piece of math. Syllogistic body paragraphs tend to be 10 to 12 sentences. So that's why we only do 4 paragraphs. And here's my contention. The kids, especially in AP world, I think it's true even like in on-level and especially college level writing. The kids that write those 4 or 5 sentence bagger paragraphs, there's just not enough support or analysis in it to really fully flesh out an argument and substantiate the claims. Kids need more space than that. All right, so let's ask the question. So, how do I write a first premise? I got you covered. So this is often where the wheels fall off for kids. So for my struggling and emerging writers, I give them a stem just early in the year. Ultimately, I want them to kick the training wheel off. So they struggle to articulate a why reason. So this is kind of contrived. It's sort of forced, but again, we move them away from it. So if a student says there is a clear reason as to why, or there are a couple of reasons why, by saying reason why, by default, they will articulate the reason why. So if I show you that in a full 3 sentences, you get this. There's one principal reason to prove that this is a moot discussion. Our society tends to scoff at the skilled trades. But these jobs not only pay extremely well, they serve as an essential backbone upon which our economy runs. Over the long haul, these workers have an earning potential that far exceeds most degrees. Our country needs to stop the narrative that non-degree holders are less than those who obtain a college education. So what I always do during writing workshops when I'm working with students is this. I say, articulate your first premise as a promise. So the first premise is a promise. And when you ask this question, and if they can, yield an answer to it, it really helps them solidify and shore up their line of reasoning. So in this one, I got to go get quotes and paraphrases that show that those who get degrees in the trades have greater, like what am I saying? Financial gain, greater financial advantages than most degrees, than most college degrees. So that's where I'm going to go. So I need quotes and paraphrases for that if I'm going to stay cogent and lock into the promise of the first premise. So just to recap here, 3 sentences argue the why reason. So I'll show you one more time what a first premise looks like without the training wheel. So again, you're shooting for 3 sentences, get to your why reason. As long as the government continues to fund private and state institutions, these places will do little more than breed woke liberalism. To earn a degree and satisfactorily meet graduation requirements, one must adopt the ideologies and tenets that are at the fundamental core of the government's agenda to create a nation of democratic leaning citizens. Given that this is the case, college is not worth the expense unless, of course, one is looking to become radically woke. What's the promise of the first premise? The government funds private and public universities and colleges. Follow the money trail. So in my textual support, in my textual analysis, I have to find, quotes, paraphrase sources that follows that money trail and proves that the government dictates curriculum at these institutions and that it's liberal leaning. So what I got to do after I write a first premise like that is go quote hunting. I got to get all my support and analysis. And usually I quote like 3 or 4 times, blend it with some paraphrasing. So let's see how we segue into the second premise, which again is the 4th sentence. If one looks at our most elite academic institutions, namely the Ivy League schools, it is not surprising to learn that 89.7% of their tenured professors self-identify as being liberals, source C. So usually in the 4th sentence, I quote or paraphrase. Let me talk to you about a heuristic within the heuristic for embedding quotes. I call it the 5-word rule. If a student takes a minimum of 5 words and slaps a relatively small quote in there, it should sound conversational, but note in this quote that I needed to bracket to make it conversational. So students need to know how to use the ellipses and the bracket in order to embed kind of seamlessly. So I quoted, I got to analyze it. While this is not a bad thing in and of itself, many contemporary students, like Molly Withers, a recent Harvard graduate, attest that they were systematically penalized for not spouting back the talking points, political positions, and liberal slants of their professors. And that comes from source A. The graph in source B clearly shows that this is the uniform consensus among conservative-leaning students. In 4-year undergraduate degree programs, this is the experience of 96.2% of the conservative student body. So one must ask, why are we asking students to get in debt for this? The answer is simple. Our country remains blind to this and does not follow the money trail. As Samuel Dunlop notes, as long as college and universities have their hands in the wallets of the U.S. Treasury, their curriculum will forever be compromised and hijacked by the left. All right, so I got plenty of support and analysis to keep the promise of that first premise. You can see I used a few sources, embedded my quotes, and I'm still doing the same thing with my sentence constructs in my tier 2. Now I got to swing it because syllogisms are like circles. I got to swing it back to the thesis in the prompt. And again, this usually takes like 2 sentences. The purpose of obtaining an education is to learn a trade or skill, not to become indoctrinated. As long as the system does not remedy this oversight, college will continue to be a scam. And again, that takes all of the like 10 to 12 sentences. So let me talk about something before I move on. I know some of you will look at this example and raise an eyebrow and say, Kristian, that's like politically, bold. What are you saying? And I'm just modeling. And I've said this in a lot of my other videos where I tackle political topics. at the end of the year, I'd be willing to bet that, my students cannot guess my political persuasion, because when I present anything that has a political slant, I look at both sides of the story, and I think I'm very fair and balanced in demonstrating and honoring those voices in my class. So I'm very, very mindful, very, very careful of that. So in my writing workshop, I showed them this exemplar, but then I showed them one that borders the other side of the fence. And I'll give you a peek at that after we answer this question. What do I do next? It's very easy. You just bust out another syllogism, right? The essay is 4 paragraphs long. And typically in the second body paragraph, my students will offer their rebuttals and concessions. So let me show you a stem that my students use in the first premise for the second body paragraph. And it just goes like this. But there's also a differing perspective on the issue that must be acknowledged and addressed. One can easily concede to the fact that, and then just run away with it, right? So my students sometimes use that to begin their concessions and their rebuttals. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I always present both sides of the equation. So I wrote a full syllogism for this particular first premise, but for time's sake, and I think, teachers and students, you get it. I don't need to show you the whole thing and bloviate and prattle on endlessly. So this is the first premise for the flip side of the coin. In an era in which inflation is soaring and the economy is lagging, it is imperative to obtain a college degree just to comfortably make ends meet. Indisputably, citizens who hold higher degrees of education have greater earning potential than those who only have high school diplomas. But it is not just about the money, it is also about the quality of life, right? So again, you have to ask, what's the promise of the first premise? And then voila, same old, same old. Keep the promise of that first premise. Go get your textual support in the form of quotes and paraphrases. Shoot for 10 to 12 sentences. Make sure you tie it back to the thesis and the prompt. So intro's done. Body paragraph 1 is done. Body paragraph number 2 is done. We got to wrap the essay up. So I do use some stems only early in the beginning of the year. Ultimately, I want my kids to get away from this. It's a little contrived. It's a little forced. It's not the most organic approach. But just to get their gears turning and to think about the purpose of a conclusion, I give them the following analogy. It's kind of like going to the 4th of July fireworks display and you see the grand finale. The conclusion of an essay is the grand finale. So you want these all-encompassing, all-encapsulating statements like simply said, evidentially, in no other words, when it's all said and done, at the end of the day, right? So if they lead like that and just tag 3 or 4 sentences onto it, they should be good, right? So I got one model for you, and it looks like this. In no other words, pushing the idea onto kids that one must go to college is a complete and utter sham. If one is looking to incur massive amounts of debt and in turn stand in the unemployment line, then it makes sense to pursue a diploma that is not worth anything more than the paper it is printed on. There are many paths to ensure one's success, but earning a college degree is not all that it's cracked up to be, right? So grand finale, big theme. All right, friends, happy teaching, happy writing. If you need to reach out to me for any reason, my email address is teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. And what's really cool is I'm starting to get suggestions from people like, hey, Kristian, could you make a synthesis paper on this? Or could you do a rhetorical analysis on this? Or could you make, Plato's Plato discussion questions for these 5 poems? Absolutely. So, feed me your ideas. In terms of my professional development and what I'm doing over the next few months. So many of you know I'm a lead teacher for the National Writing Project, have presented with NCTE, done a tad bit of work with College Board, applied practice, perfection learning. So I am on the circuit quite a bit, pounding the pavement. And one of the things I'm going to be doing in the foreseeable future is this, something called the Teach It Right one-to-one mentorship. So with the National Writing Project, I did the Teach It Right 5-week mastermind. And the overwhelming feedback I got on that was, man, oh man, Kristian, I wish I could have taken that course with you because, you know, some of the content, some of the classes didn't really pertain to what I'm doing. Like, for example, I teach 9th and 10th grade, and we never do rhetorical analysis. So the week that we spent on rhetorical analysis really didn't have any pertinence. It wasn't germane to what I was doing, you know. So I'm listening, and I'm like, all right, let's do one-on-one mentorships. So what I've been doing is working one-on-one with teachers or with departments, and you can get information on that at www.teachinghowtowrite.com. Another thing that I'm well known for are my alternative grading methods. I'm doing one-on-one and department lessons for the alternative grading methods as well, so that you can reclaim your evenings and weekends. Just get a new paradigm to tackle, you know, the endless heaping stack of essays that taunt us at night. And then I also created a self-paced course because I know that some teachers are just, you know, straddled with time constraints. So that's all there, www.teachinghowtowrite.com. If you have any questions or you know want to hop on a Zoom call to go over any of that stuff, more than happy to do so. That's it from here. I'll keep them coming. And I should have said this at the beginning. This is my 100th video in the channel. So this marks number 100. I'll keep them coming. Take care.